So, if you started with the long 2 hour summary of the United States impact in World War II and the rescue of Jews, this second video is a video of resource training for how to best use the materials. Most of it is taken from MCHE, who is the organizer and founder of the White Rose contest. You can find information on their site as well. So in this short session, we're going to be looking at a variety of different types of primary sources. Not all of the primary sources that your students may use, but a variety of them. This is one of the few cartoons, and the reason that they chose this cartoon was because there was just so much going on in it. It was in a Midwestern newspaper, and the heading, as you can see, is "Couldn't They Swap" or something. And it looks at a lot of issues that were relevant in 1938 when this cartoon was published. And it was poking at fun at a lot of the issues. So, for example, the Germans had said that Jews couldn't take property out of the country when they left. And so it's talking about the $3,000 grocery store. They like to trade in on one in Germany, tongue-in-cheek. And the person behind that man is going, ditto, I want to do the same thing. And that in part, they've got Czechoslovakia, Germany, and Poland. And if you remember, the Sudetenland, which was an important starting point for the war, there were Germans living in the Sudetenland, but it was part of Czechoslovakia. And then in an effort to appease Germany, France and England agreed to hand over the Sudetenland without discussing it with Czechoslovakia, so that they hopefully wouldn't start another war. So all of that's being addressed in these snippets in the cartoon. There's a lot of movement in Europe at this time, and a lot of Germans were moving into newly acquired territories like the Sudetenland. And if you look, I don't have it, if on the bottom right is an image of Uncle Sam leaning on a billboard and making comments about American emergency rescue. So all of these points would encourage students to do further research. And obviously cartoons are popular. So this is an 11-minute testimony by Kurt Levy, who was, before he left Europe, was an attorney and had a PhD, but was unable to work because he was Jewish. You want to look at probably from like 5 minutes forward. Once he came to the United States, he ended up being a survivor in Kansas City. And looking at this, hang on, let me get you to the right place.
When that lesson was over, we went back in our regular class. It was a high-class Jews who lived in, became a lawyer anyhow. Money. He pulled me by the arm behind the button. We heard goose steps, hard heels on the stone floor of the courthouse. The judge, who was a wise man, knew what was happening.
So he's trying to get
He knew the Nazis were coming.
immigration.
He pulled me by the arm behind the bar
he's in the
and pushed me
courthouse
into his chamber.
trying to get the paperwork done.
At that moment, the stormtroopers came in, Juden raus, out with the Jews. I disappeared through a back door, and a few weeks later, the lawyers, all Jewish lawyers and degrees, were annihilated. So that was the end of the career that I had planned and worshipped.
And if you go on, let's see, I think it's about...
Emigrated early, maybe in 32, to Johannesburg, South Africa. And he kept on writing me how nice it is, why don't you come? So that was another project. And just as I was getting ready for it, the newspaper reported anti-Semitic outbursts in Johannesburg. So I said, what I do, go from the fire in the frying pan? And that eliminated Johannesburg. Why didn't I go to the United States? Because I couldn't. It was my first choice right along. My parents were against it on the water, but I would have overcome that. But you need an affidavit to get into the United States. I had no close relatives in this country. Had one distant relative, second or third cousin of my dad's, to whom I wrote, and who turned me down because his brother and sister were still in Germany, and he felt that he has to bring them out, and he did not want to weaken his affidavit for his brother.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this here. The information about his experience getting immigration starts at about 1158. And the immigration part is the part that's relevant to doing research for this project. And because it does go into detail about the things that he had to do and the difficulty he had getting into immigration. And it's an entree to help students begin to explore the immigration process. You can use the details from the previous video training that lists the 7 steps for getting into the United States to help students move forward. So this document is a State Department memo on temporarily halting immigration. And if you remember in the previous video, we talked about Breckinridge Long, who had actively, as Assistant Secretary of State, had actively obstructed immigrants from entering the country as part of his State Department responsibilities. This is a 4-page document, and I recommend that you start on page 4, where you get to read a memo written by Warren in the Visa Division to Breckinridge Long, saying that he could find no way to legally stop immigration and offer some alternatives. So it's clear in the document that Breckinridge Long, while he has been able to do some obstruction, he's trying to do even more. And he's got his team in the State Department working to find other ways to keep immigrants from coming in. And then you can go back to page 1, and Breckinridge Long, you get in page 1, Breckinridge Long's response to Warren outlining exactly how they might make it more difficult for people to immigrate into the United States. So this is a really interesting document. Sort of following up on that is the State Department Visa Division's memorandum. It's 3 pages long, and it was written on the day after the document that we just looked at. And it had all of the parties that were involved in that earlier document, in addition to a new party, I.F. Nixon, who was the Deputy Commissioner of Immigration Service. And ultimately, you have 4 people in a private meeting with this memo that is essentially the minutes of the meeting. And it outlines exactly what their plan is going to be to obstruct immigrants from entering the country. This document would be good for younger students because it's short and plain spoken. So it's pretty easy and straightforward. An 8th grader should be able to deal with this document and move forward successfully. So Jan Karski, I think he was mentioned in the previous video, but he was a rescuer and a political entity. And in this interview, which was done with Claude Lanzmann, Lanzmann was the person who did the Shoah film, the 8-hour film called Shoah, that's primarily survivor testimony and is really, and everybody who is deeply interested in the Holocaust has to set aside time to watch Lanzmann's film. But he did this interview, and Karski is telling Lanzmann what FDR said when he went to meet FDR. And if you remember in the previous video, we talk about this meeting, and Karski describes going into the office. He describes what he told FDR and FDR's response. This is a great primary source document for students to work with. So this is a really interesting document that follows up kind of in chronological order with the other 2 that we've just discussed. Henry Morgenthau was the Secretary of Treasury, and he was approached by private entities who were trying to bring refugees into the United States. They had the money, they were willing to sponsor them, etc. But the problem was that the paperwork to be able to get the refugees into the country was being held up in the State Department. So Morgenthau sends 2 of his Treasury officials to the State Department to find out why things are being held up. And ultimately, they end up writing an 18-page report about it. I would suggest that you look at the first 2 pages and the last 2 paragraphs. Those are the most important. It's beautifully written. So if you are an ESL teacher and you're looking for something really quality for your students to read and use and work from, this might be the document to suggest. So ultimately, they write this report to the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, and it's titled "The Report to the Secretary on the Acquiescence of this Government in the Murder of the Jews." It's very pointed. They just don't mince words. And in the document, it describes that certain officials in the State Department have been obstructing the reasonable movement of time of paperwork to get refugees into the country. They make in the document 4 specific claims of guilt, and they lay them out numbered. There are 1 through 4. 2 of them are on page 1, 2 of them are on page 2, which is why you want to look at 1 and 2. The body of the paper lays out the evidence of the 4 claims of obstruction. And at the end, they lambast Breckinridge Long, and they bring in a congressman. They quote a congressman, Emanuel Seller, in the last paragraph, and that would provide another avenue for students to be looking for material if they were writing a paper on this. It's a good juxtaposition to the document seen earlier that came out of Breckinridge Long's office. So at this point, the U.S. has taken over southern Italy, and they're being overrun with refugees. There's been this report that Morgenthau had his Treasury officers do, and that has come out, and the president decides he needs to do something, and he makes this speech to Congress on June 9th. And in the speech, he's announcing the creation of a place for refugees to go. He spends most of the time in this speech, which is not very long, it's like 2 pages about. He spends most of the time talking about it in loaded language, like the tyranny of the Nazis. And that the most important thing is that the United States win the war and the situation of refugees in Italy be taken control of. So he's making these bold, strong, action-oriented statements. Finally, in the last 2 small paragraphs, he announces that arrangements have been made, and this is really what this speech is all about, that arrangements have been made to bring approximately 1,000 refugees, mostly women and children, to the United States, mostly Italian, and they are going to be housed in a vacated army camp under security. So that's kind of a loaded statement, right? He's saying he's bringing refugees in. He's not bringing many refugees, certainly not meeting any quotas. And he's saying, I don't trust them because refugees are bad. And so we have to have security, and we have to have them fenced in. So this document, again, provides some really interesting fodder for research. So the Madison Square Garden Rally of the Bund that we talked about in the previous video is condensed in the link here with the focus on Walter Winchell. Walter Winchell was probably the most famous journalist, American journalist of the period, and he was a little bit of a scandal monger, but everybody loved him and paid attention to him, and he publicly condemned this American Nazi rally and Nazis. So this shows some of what he did and some of the rally itself. So this is our website, and I just kind of wanted to go through the site and show you where to find things because everything that you need is there. We also are developing a kind of cheat sheet that I'll have available in a couple of days, and it's the 12th of January now, that I'll have available for you that will make it easy for you to access the primary source documents and the prompt and everything all in one package. So we'll have that ready for you as well. So finally, available on the website, and probably we'll be able to send out in emails, is what has been put together as a teacher cheat sheet. And it goes into, it organizes all the specific details in a really condensed and easy manner for you to find. So on the first page, for example, you have the contest prompt at the top. And then you've got a list of all of the contest primary source documents with links to places to go to get background information on all of the documents. We also have a list of potential topics that students might want to do research on. And then you've got the primary sources. And remember, they must use at least 3 of the primary provided contest primary documents. And in addition, they need to use at least 2 other sources obtained through research. So it's really important for students to have access to this. So here's a summary of all the contest documents. And then when you move on to the next pages, you have this summary followed by detailed description of what each document provides. And so that's the 3 pages, both of secondary sources and of primary sources. This is a great piece of our material for you to easily understand everything. And that draws to a close the details about how to use the website, about what sources to use, basic information that should be helpful in determining how to support your students in being successful with this project.